Hi. Protein is a new portable desktop wavetable synth from Waldorf, inspired by their classic gritty 8-bit Microwave 1. And it's designed with affordability, portability, and hands-on controls in mind. It's got 8-voice polyphony and can layer or round-robin sounds across 4 different timbres. Its oscillators serve up PPG and Microwave 1 wavetables and artifacts. It's got dirt, distortion, and flavor features to spice things up, as well as a host of other built-in effects. In this video, I'll take a look at what makes it special, what it can do in depth, pros and cons compared to the competition, and I'll also upload multi-samples of it to my Patreon so you can get a taste of playing its sounds at home. Before I start, a quick disclosure. Waldorf sent me Protein. Other than that, no money changed hands. They have no say over the content of this video and don't get to see it before it's published. Okay, let's start with an overview. Protein is all about raw 8-bit waveforms bunched together in wavetables from Waldorf's Microwave 1 and classic PPG, based on the concept of scanning through a list or table of waveforms to synthesize sounds. The idea is, for example, rather than develop an oscillator that can crossfade between 2 wave shapes, say a sine and a square, a wavetable would contain multiple single-cycle waveforms that represent preset interpolated steps between the 2 waveforms. Other examples mimic various synthesis techniques like oscillator sync, or FM, pulse width modulation, performance synths, the harmonics in organs, or even speech synthesis. So Protein faithfully emulates the original digital microwave wavetable 8-bit chip, giving it a gritty lo-fi character. Each voice can play 2 different wavetables out of the available 64, and also includes a noise generator, a multi-mode filter, which also has a drive mode. There are 3 envelopes and 2 LFOs per voice, along with a mod matrix with 8 slots. It supports poly aftertouch and MPE. You've got a total of 8 of these voices, which you can layer or round robin across up to 4 different layers or timbres. And then you've got 2 master effects slots, which you can apply selectively to each of the 4 layers. Protein can store up to 250 presets currently and comes with about 220 something. That means you've only got about 30 free slots, but I'm told by Waldorf a future update might add 100 or so more slots. Protein also has a built-in arpeggiator and monophonic sequencer and a chord mode with scale options. In terms of workflow, while Protein is small, it's relatively hands-on. You've got 21 knobs, most of which have dual functions with shift, and even more parameters are accessible using this screen and its companion detent push encoder. You can use shift either as a momentary toggle to access a specific parameter, or just press it once to access various shift parameters on the panel. Most of the knobs are pots to control continuous parameters, and the ones without lines are detent push encoders. They don't always do something when you push them, at least not in the current firmware, but sometimes they access additional functionality. I wouldn't call this too menu divey, with a few exceptions, which are the mod matrix, the effects, which have quite a few parameters when you dive in to scroll through them. There are additional arpeggiator and sequencer parameters, which are hidden in a menu. And of course, settings. But still, overall, quite a few parameters are accessible on the panel. Occasionally, modules will have additional parameters. You can access these either by touching a module. So say, for example, to edit the envelopes, to access additional filter functions or modes. You can also navigate between the different modules by pressing the edit button. And using the screen encoder, I found it faster just to nudge the module knobs a bit. The envelopes have an interesting and non-conventional control scheme. There are 3 envelopes, and each is an ADSR envelope, so theoretically you'd need 12 knobs to control these, or 4 ADSR knobs and 1 button to toggle between the 3. Waldorf took a different route here. You nudge a knob to open up its envelope parameters, and then use the screen encoder to choose which parameter it is you're editing. Then the last parameter that you edited per each envelope remains in control. So say, for example, if I control the release on the amp envelope, I'll still control that, and then sustain on the filter envelope, and then attack on the wave envelope. It remembers which parameter you last controlled. It works well, I think, if you've got both hands on the panel, but if you're playing something and want to edit the various parameters, you can do it, I guess, with the screen encoder or going back and forth. It becomes a bit more tedious with one-handed use. In terms of build, overall things feel good. The bottom part of the enclosure is plastic and the top is metal, though it's the kind that does pick up fingerprints over time. The knobs, pots, and endless encoders work well, no complaints. Initially, I found that a couple of the knobs were rubbing against the surface, but pulling them out a bit solved that problem. Also, it seems like the scan rate of some of the knobs is a bit slow. The filter's pretty smooth, but say, for example, the resonance has a bit of clickiness. I noticed that across some other knobs if you move them too fast. There's no steppiness though when modulating parameters or controlling them with an external controller. I do have one complaint about the physical build, and that's that the blue shift functions are fairly dark and hard to read in low light situations. In terms of connectivity, you've got 2 1/4-inch stereo outputs, a 3.5mm headphone jack, USB-C for both power and MIDI, but not audio, so there's no way to get multi-channel audio out of Protein. And then you've got 2 3.5mm TRS type jacks for MIDI in and out. Protein comes with 2 MIDI dongle adapters for full-size DIN MIDI ports, and it also comes with a USB Type-A isolator, which works very well and is needed if you want to connect this to a computer. If I had to complain, I'd say it was better if this was USB Type-C on both ends. But overall, I've not seen any company add something like this to their synth, so kudos to Waldorf. Okay, let's dive in and start with the oscillators. You've got 2 of them and they're identical. You can either link them and control their parameters together or control them independently. Each oscillator can play one of 64 Waldorf 1 or PPG style wavetables. Each wavetable has 61 single cycle waveforms, which you can either move through manually or modulate through. And then the last 3 waveforms are always a triangle, square, hard to reach sometimes, and saw. Since each wavetable tells a story, and these 3 wavetables at the end can interrupt that story, you can block them if you want. So instead of all waves, just change this to limit waves, and you'll no longer hit them at the end of the wavetable, whether you scan through it manually or modulate it. So these wavetables are what form the classic gritty character of this synth, especially at lower frequencies. You can see their jagged edges, even if we take a simple sine wave. Of course, we can filter these jaggies out, these additional harmonics out, and get a smooth sine wave. But that, of course, wouldn't be the point of this synth. This is an example of another particularly gritty waveform. Again, we can filter it to remove the extra harmonics, so you can get smooth waveforms. But grit feels like home here. I already went through quite a few of these in the beginning of this video, and the point of this synth, I think, is the exploration of the various nooks and crannies of each of these wavetables and their gritty character. And there's no smooth high-resolution wavetable mode you can run to here, nor can you load up your own wavetables, at least as of the current firmware. So these wavetables are what you need to be into. Note also that there's no smoothing here. It's not that big of a deal, but you might notice it when there are extreme changes in the wavetable. Like this one, for example. Besides scanning through the waveforms, we've got 2 octaves of coarse tuning and fine detuning as well as a few modulation options we'll talk about in a bit. Beside that, that's pretty much it for the oscillators. You've got a noise generator hidden in the filter module. Let's maybe turn down the level of the oscillator so we can hear just the noise. Bring up the dirt. This seems like regular good old white noise, which you can filter, of course, if you want. And then there are a few more dirt options. Besides level, it's got a crackle mode, which does this, or a Geiger mode, which crackles less frequently. And then a few burst modes, a simple click. So you get a little transient every time you press a key, and then a few longer clicks or bursts. And you can, of course, combine these with the main oscillator to get a nice transient. Okay, let's move on and talk about the filter module. It's got 3 different modes: drive, high pass, and low pass. The low pass filter is a CM emulator, 12 dB per octave. Low pass with resonance, and it will self-oscillate if you feed it just a bit of audio. Resonance doesn't reduce bass, maybe a bit at higher levels, but not much. Anyway, that's the low pass filter. There's also a high pass filter. Let's reduce resonance. And this also has resonance if you want, which can emphasize the bass at lower frequencies. The filter, by the way, has key tracking as a shift function, and at 0.25, you can play the filter chromatically if you want. And then there's the third drive mode, which I guess is in the filter section because it does the opposite of the filter. It adds harmonics as opposed to subtracting them. And it has a few modes. A transistor mode. You can also see that it's not linear. Let's check out the tube mode. More aggressive. Adds nice harmonics. Pickup emulates an electrostatic pickup. And diode. Then finally a crunch, which is a kind of a wave folder mode. These are all, relatively speaking, very subtle though. Certainly compared to the drive effect, which we'll get to later. Another important difference between the drive filter mode and the drive effect is that you can't modulate the effects parameters, but you can modulate what is the filter cutoff here, but really is increasing drive. So besides turning this knob manually, I could also increase the envelope amount to modulate through this wave folder. Of course, all of these drives apply to more complex waveforms. One final thing before we head off to modulation, there's a pan option, which is a shift function, and you can either pan to the right or left, or have the voices panned randomly. So that's the basic audio voice structure. Let's talk about modulation, which is also per voice. You've got on-panel access to 3 envelopes in the way that we talked about earlier, as well as 2 LFOs. The envelopes are assigned as per their name. We just saw the filter envelope actually just push drive as opposed to the filter cutoff. But if we were to move into a more traditional filter mode, then we could very easily get a filter envelope going. And these can be fairly snappy. Anyway, that's the filter envelope. We could also, let's turn this down for a bit, activate the wave envelope and scan through the wavetable. One thing we should be aware of is that since the envelopes are curved, you can hear their curve here. That's the decay envelope going through the wavetable. So even though they're rendered as straight lines here, actually these are curved. There's no way to change the curves, at least not in the current firmware. So if you'd like a non-slope scan through a wavetable, you'll need to do that with an LFO, at least currently. Each envelope can also be tied to velocity with shift. So as you play with more force, you'll get more of the wavetable. Just don't forget to turn on limit waves. Otherwise, you'll hit the saw at the end of the wavetable. So that's the wave envelope. We already heard the filter envelope, which can also be velocity sensitive, and the amp envelope is a standard ADSR VCA envelope. It too, by the way, can be made velocity sensitive with shift. So those are the envelopes. Then we've got 2 LFOs. They're not pointed by default to anything. You assign them in the mod matrix. So you choose basically one of the LFOs as a source. You choose your target, which can be, let's say, filter cutoff. And then choose an amount, which is a mod depth, basically. You've got a few of the usual suspect shapes, which you can access with shift. The filter rate can be either not tempo synced or with shift and ratio. Tempo synced, and there's a hidden parameter in here. You can make the filters per voice or global. When they're per voice, they'll reset with every key press, and when they're global, they'll just be in sync with each other. The per voice option gives you a random value for every key press when the filter is slow in sample and hold mode. But you've also got a random generator in the mod matrix, so beside the 2 LFOs, you've got a bunch of other sources, including, like I mentioned, a random value generator per key press. The mod matrix, by the way, is just source, destination, and amount, so you can't control the mod depth of one slot using a different slot in the matrix, but you've got a few controlled sources, so both LFOs can be controlled by either the mod wheel or Aftertouch. So, for example, this is how I'd set up the mod wheel to control the mod depth of LFO2. So that wraps up modulation. Let's take a look and listen to the effects. Like I mentioned, you've got 2 slots. You can occupy either of the 2 slots with any of the effects choices, as long as you don't use an effect twice. Let's take a quick listen to these. So this is our dry tone, and this is the chorus. When unshifted, these 2 knobs control the dry-wet mix of the effect, and you also have quick access to selecting the effect using the bottom encoder. And if we want to edit the parameters, we'll need to hit shift, and we can cycle through the different parameters and edit them this way. So you've got to go one by one. So that's the chorus, there's a flanger. I won't go through all the parameters, but let's get a quick taste of a few. Let's take a quick listen to a few more. This is the phaser. Tremolo. Again, all of these have a bunch of parameters. The drive. Okay, so as promised, this is way more extreme than the filter drive. So that was the transistor type. Then there's the tube. Gotta be out of shift for this. And there's, oops, here we go, type. Pickup. So this can get nasty. And there's a diode. Distortion. And then finally, our wave folder. So, triangles fold best, or just round waveforms in general. So this is pre-fold, and as we increasingly fold this waveform, this happens. You can't modulate this. It is a bit clicky, like I mentioned earlier. I don't know if they can add smoothing to this or not. The textures here can get nice and aggressive. So that's drive, and then there's a compressor with a whole bunch of parameters I won't get into here, and an EQ, delay, again with its host of parameters synced or not synced, filtering, and then there's a reverb. Parameters here are, again, a bunch of options, including color or filtering. Okay, let's move on and take a look at the arpeggiator and sequencer. They're both pretty simple, but have a couple of interesting options. So you edit parameters, as we saw before, by going through the parameters with this encoder and pressing them to change them. So that's one octave, but there's more if you want. One thing odd, there's no arpeggiator hold, at least not in the current firmware. Spoiler, I asked and they said they'd add it, but for now you've got to hold the keys. Anyway, there are a few direction modes. And then there's swing. Gate control. And if we continue to scroll, there's a reset option, which is interesting. It'll reset after a few notes as you specify, which I think is cool. Let's go for 4. And then there are a few pattern options, which are rhythmic options. So that's the arpeggiator. Of course, there's tempo and time division as well. Let's take a listen to the sequencer. This is a monophonic transposable step sequencer. So I can record a pattern up to 32 steps, but let's say settle for 6. So that's my pattern. There's no hold here either. But you can transpose the pattern, and it'll stay in time as long as you're holding a key. You can also change the sequence length here. You can edit the sequence manually if you like. So this is our pattern, and it goes up to 32 steps. You can also edit velocities if you want on a per step basis. It can be a bit tedious, but you can. When you record a sequence, it'll also record velocities, by the way. And Protein will respond to velocity based on how you programmed the envelopes or the mod matrix. A few other sequencer features. You've got swing and gate as previously, and you've also got a playback direction, forwards and back, and a one-shot mode too. Moving on, let's fill in a few blanks on the multi-timbrality front. Like I mentioned, you've got up to 4 timbres per preset. You can play them separately like that. So just bring in layers as you want. And the nice thing about playing patches like that is that, as you can hear, they're not cut off, as opposed to when swapping presets where they will be cut off. And then besides playing them separately, you could always activate multi-mode, in which case you've got a few options. Layered will play all or some of them together, though each one will take up a voice. So in this case, I'm playing all 4 layers together. So I could only play 2 notes at a time before I'd get stealing of one of the notes. But if I take out a few layers, and you can either turn them on or off like this, or just double tap them. So now I've got 2 layers at a time. I could play 4 of these at a time before notes start getting stolen on the 5th note. There are a few other multi-modes which we can choose here. So for example, in round robin mode, it'll play a different layer per key press. Let's turn this guy on again with the arpeggiator or sequencer. So this opens up a few interesting options. Just jumping through the layers, either in succession or randomly. And then MIDI split mode will only play 1 timbre per MIDI channel. So here I'm on channel 1, I get this sound, channel 2, I get this sound, channel 3, this sound, channel 4, this sound. You can shift these channels, by the way, if you want. You can also create monophonic layers and also have the envelopes not trigger when you play legato. You can also copy and paste layers between different timbres or presets, or load a layer from a separate preset. So we now imported this layer from a different preset. And then one more thing about multis, you can route each layer either into both effects, only into effect 2, so not through 1, or have it bypass the effects altogether. Effects 1 is always routed into effects 2. Then finally, in terms of main on-panel features, we've got the flavor knob, which loosens up various parameters. You may or may not hear it depending on the preset. In some cases, it could be subtle or not noticeable. It can be a per voice variation. So for example, here, every key press is the same, but as you can hear, things are more randomized here, but it is subtle. One more example: before, after, before, after. Moving on, let's take a quick look at the chord and scale functions. You access these via Shift, and we can turn chords on, in which case we can play one of several chords. And these will just transpose across the keyboard chromatically. Or you can lock the chords into a scale. So in this case, you can choose the root note of the scale and then the degrees of the chord as well as the actual scale. So if I were to go into, say, C major, I'd get a major chord if I press, say, C or G, but a minor chord if I press A or D, or diminished if I press B. And there are a few degree combos here to choose from. That's about it. It would be nice if we had more voicings or chords that are more spread out, or just let us program our own chord. You can't do that, at least not in the current firmware. Then before we head out to the pros and cons, a few miscellaneous items. There's no published MIDI implementation chart for Protein. Waldorf says that's because there are too many parameters. I think it would still be nice if they attempted to do something either through NRPNs or separate MIDI channels. That said, you can map MIDI CCs to control onboard parameters. You do that using Shift and Settings. I've made a few mappings here. You can scroll through them and delete mappings that you don't like. So for example, I mapped CC73 to the amp envelope attack parameter, so I could delete that if I wanted. To create a new mapping, you nudge the parameter you want to MIDI learn to, then hit Shift in Settings, press Map CC, and the next CC you send it will be mapped to the filter cutoff of timbre A in this case. So now I've got control of the cutoff of timbre A here. I could then move to, say, add a multi and move to timbre B, and I'd still be controlling the cutoff of timbre A here. So it's a bit of a pain to do this for every parameter on every timbre. It's a good way to get immediate access to certain parameters or to automate them in your DAW. Once you create this mapping, then as you turn the filter cutoff on timbre A, it's going to broadcast that CC out to your computer. Still, it would be nice if there was a standardized MIDI implementation, so somebody could perhaps make a third-party editor for this, because there is no editor or librarian for Protein, at least not as of the making of this video. A few other miscellaneous items. You've got support for MPE, which is great. A few other settings I won't go through. You've got glide control, as well as legato portamento control, and you can also set the pitch bend range for the pitch wheel or strip. Okay, let's talk about the pros and cons of Protein. Usually I separate this section to pros and cons, but here they're somewhat mixed together, mainly because I think that stands out the most about this synth is its gritty character. So this can be either its strongest pro or biggest con, while other wavetable synths may hedge their bets and give you smooth 16-bit wavetables, interpolated transitions between frames, or other synthesis features like FM or other forms of funky wave shaping. Waldorf's Protein goes all in on 8-bit lo-fi. You also can't load up your own wavetables, you only get the included 64. Now, as we saw earlier, you can filter the grid out, or use the more standard virtual analog style waveforms for more traditional synth sounds, but there are plenty of other synths that do that too and may have something else going for them. So here I think it's a relatively simple decision. If you like these gritty sounds and want them in hardware form, Protein is a decent way to introduce them into your setup at a relatively cost-effective price. There are other synths that have both gritty wavetables and smoother ones, but they cost more. Further on the pros side, it's great that you've got 4 timbres, which you can layer in a multi or round robin. But if you do want to layer them, you're somewhat limited by having only a total of 8 voices. If you want to layer all 4, you only get 2 notes at a time, which still works for ARPs or sequences. And in MIDI split mode, you can use certain layers as a bass layer and have them just work monophonically. Add another monophonic lead layer, and still have 6 voices for a pad sound. Then on the hands-on controls side, I'd say Waldorf struck a good balance overall, except maybe for the shared controls for the envelopes, which are hard to use with one hand. If you've got both hands free, it's somewhat faster. Then firmly on the pros side are the number of effects here and the fact that you've got 2 slots for them. It's always great to bake specific effects into your presets and be able to save that. However, you can't, at least not currently, modulate the different effects parameters, and controlling them real time can get a bit clicky. Further on the cons side, there's no external editor or librarian for this, and the lack of a standard MIDI implementation makes it hard for third parties to make one. Beside that, I mentioned a few wishlist features throughout this video. None, though, I think are very consequential because it really boils down to whether you like the character of this synth. If you don't, more features won't mean much, and if you do, this is probably the most affordable version of these sounds in hardware form. So that's it for Protein. If you want to get a taste for playing its sounds at home, check out my multi-sampled instruments on Patreon, where you'll also find my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.